my dad was a chemical engineer. My mom was kind of stay at home, but then also got into healthcare field and early childhood education. My parents bought their home. We, kind of lived in a middle class white community for the most part. I mean, there were some families of color, but not all. So I left home at 14 and traveled around and didn't like being like a kid. I wanted to grow up. And within a couple of years, I kind of got involved in some tenant organizing in the community that I lived in, and got exposed to people from different left traditions. Then I also met, I kind of, did on the job training to become a typesetter. And then through that work was exposed to movement print shops. And at that time, people would say freedom of the press belongs to those who own one. And so, there was no internet. It was all about publishing. It was all about zines and books and magazines and articles. And so as a typesetter in the trade, I just started reading everything that I was working on, and I worked in movement shops. So I was kind of getting a political education at the same time as developing my trade. And yeah, so it's sort of first focused on housing and then on feminism and coming out queer. So that those kind of like social movement kind of politics. I think that I was just kind of mm, drawn to anarchism as kind of anti-ideology, if you will. Like it was, it was easier to be kind of a political hippie, dyke type than like as an anarchist than like, some of the socialist or communist party type folks seem very rigid and not as open to, the sort of hippie ethos of the time. So, yeah, I mean, I think that it was like, um, respecting the the development of left ideologies without necessarily going as deep as some of the folks who were really into the party, like just not really a party kind of person. So you could identify as an anarchist and find your sort of your people through that. And it just was a little bit more open and, consensus based. And what I would have to say is that I think that that the socialist and communist party types were more Eurocentric, and the anarchists were a little more kind of did more solidarity work around indigenous issues, around land issues, around race. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but like, one of the things that I think drew me to anarchism as a political theory was that it didn't really subsume race under class. It was able to see the intersection of race and class and gender as a complex system that we needed to unlearn, and we needed to fight against those constructions all at the same time, that we didn't just presume that class was the only struggle. So I don't know. I mean, maybe that's partly because I came from the middle class, so it was like not as deeply kind of rooted in a working class perspective. That's also possible. but I think I was drawn to the Indigenous solidarity piece, and that's where a lot of my sort of political development went over the years. Was like Leonard Peltier solidarity. We did prisoner solidarity, political prisoners, but also social prisoners. So those seemed very linked. Those struggles seem very linked. Later on, in the 80s, no, early 90s, a lot of the anarchist scene that I was kind of adjacent to, I guess, or part of, was mobilizing around the far right. And there was an emergence of a sort of closing ranks between the Nazis and the Klan in our town, and they called themselves the Heritage Front. And so they were quite dangerous and doing a lot of damage and hurting and killing people. And so we started an organization called Anti-Racist Action. There was already one kind of ARA in Columbus, Ohio, and there was a network of anti-racist action organizations, mostly called themselves ARA. There was some discussion about the name, whether it should be anti-fascist action, more similar to the UK, or whether anti-racist action was really the proper term for us. And I think we settled on that it was. And we also worked with like larger social movement organizations that were more focused on systemic racism. So not just the emergence of the far right, but also just more the day-to-day police harassment issues and housing and economic issues facing people of color. So that was, and then in that context, the anarchists really kind of ran away with the ball on the anti-fascist struggle at that time, and actually told the people who came from the more left parties that they were not welcome as parties in the anti-racist action. They were actually welcome as individuals, but not welcome to come and try to build their party through the organization. So that was kind of an anarchist win at that time, and it was pretty effective street-based, anti-Nazi front in Toronto, and we did have a lot of success in pushing them back. But I guess, anarchists can be kind of sloppy about their politics, and it can just attract people who just want to be on the edge. Like they don't necessarily have a lot of analysis. And so we actually lost an individual to the far right from ARA. So it tells you that here the anarchists had the moment and kept the party builders on the left kind of at bay, right? But then weren't able to prevent a member from basically going over to the fascists. So it was a really learning experience there. But yeah, a lot of the work that we were doing outside of that was prisoner solidarity. We had a newspaper called Bulldozer, the only vehicle for prison reform. And it had a letter writing relationship with political prisoners across North America. And that project lasted many, many years. And as a person in the trades, I worked on the paper, to help produce it and get it out the door. And I had letter writing relationships with some of the political prisoners who were doing time for different direct actions. And so, it was kind of learning a lot about, the limits of organizing legally, and how people were kind of taking that on, and committing themselves to certain actions that were outside the boundaries of the law, and then looking for solidarity from the community that was on the outside. So, yeah. So that was my kind of experience through the 90s. I know there was a gathering, there was an anarchist unconference in Toronto in the late 80s. And I was kind of, like I said, adjacent. I wasn't really part of the organizing. I was just kind of friends with folks who were. And it was really transformative for a lot of people. At that moment, I think I was kind of more of a lesbian separatist and not as drawn to the mixed gender organizations. So I can't say it was transformative for anarchism. It's kind of just my own personal path. It's kind of just a little curvy. Really, I came to anarchism very young. Like, I must have been 15, 16 when I sort of, did some of the basic reading, Emma Goldman, and, just kind of exposed myself to the ideas, and just kind of made sense as a youth. And like I said, I just wasn't drawn to I was drawn to politics, but not like party building. Just so I'll turn to them. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe no particular moment. Well, I think we use the term anti-authoritarian more frequently. And as feminists, when that was the term of the day, that was also a way of looking at a political philosophy that didn't just continue male domination without any kind of strategy or naming it. Yeah, I mean, I would be as probably comfortable with the term socialist as a broad category, just because I don't know that anarchism sounds like very disorganized, and I think that there is a downside to anarchism, that there is a kind of just choose your own adventure kind of about the politics. And socialism provides a little bit more structure. But I think what anarchism offers that socialism doesn't, just on a broad pass, is consensus decision making. And I think that, again, going back to the being drawn to Indigenous struggles, I think anarchists learn from Indigenous people that consensus was the preferred decision making method. And so I think that was that's what I mean by it being less Eurocentric, perhaps, than some of the socialist party types. And maybe not really, articulating that. But there's plenty of sexism, racism, homophobia, and all those things within the anarchist scene. It's not like it was pure. But yeah, does that help? I don't know, because they get a little bit close to the sort of libertarian right, and that movement is ascendant. We are on the back foot, and so I would probably be more likely to vote, right? Like to use the franchise, even if it's relatively meaningless, more likely to use it, just as, again, being in a sense being on the back foot, in terms of how the world is going. And yeah, I mean, I think that you know, socialists have something to learn from anarchists in terms of maybe the consensus decision-making process and ways of doing the kind of social engagements, that could draw more people in to the left in general, and I don't know. I mean, I think studying third world liberation movements would, be beneficial for all of us in the North American left. Just understanding a little bit more about like leadership. I think that's actually a critical feature of socialism that anarchism kind of tries to get around, which is, sort of, not wanting to have leaders be paramount, but that doesn't mean you don't need leadership. And I think that having people who are willing to put themselves on the line for a cause on the left is like, it's really inspiring. Like, look at Zoran Mamdani right now. Like it's just like, wow, could that actually happen? Could that happen in Canada? Could we see somebody like that emerge within the electoral system who identifies as a democratic socialist? Could that happen here? And how disappointed we're all going to be when he when he bends a knee to anybody anywhere for any reason. But and yeah, like those limitations of electoral politics, there's nothing new about that. Like, it's an old story of how limiting the electoral system is. And I think anarchism brings a critique of electoral politics that's really helpful, again, through like supporting the development of consensus decision making. But it doesn't mean you don't need leadership. And so I think that's kind of the Achilles heel of anarchism as I've experienced it. Well, I mean, there's lots to, think about. But I mean, there's some of the sidetracks of the anarchist movement, like they got totally sidetracked by the animal rights movement, I felt, and that was, I think, kind of disappointing, and could end up leading down that sort of libertarian right-wing pathway. So I think some critical reflection is always helpful. But ultimately, we're all just human, just trying to figure shit out.